We're now joined by the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace. Good morning to you. I mean, this is just appalling to watch, isn't it? To watch it all unfold. It has all happened so quickly, the Taliban taking over Afghanistan, and we've been speaking to people throughout the programme this morning who are terrified. They're in Afghanistan, they don't know what's going to happen to them, they don't know what their future looks like, but they fear that it's not going to be good. We have abandoned the people of Afghanistan, haven't we?
We haven't abandoned them. I have sent in another 600 British men and women specifically for one job, which is to secure our part of the airport and keep the runway open. And currently, while the footage you've seen is from the south part of the airport, which is the civil part, which is very sadly a reflection of the fact civil and charter flights have been suspended. On the military side, the British forces and the US and others have secured their area, and military flights are coming in and out as we speak. And I think your footage is showing British troops going. They have gone there to process all the people we can to get them out of the country. That is not just British passport holders, but all those Afghans we have an obligation to do. That means we have to make the security in the right place, which is what we've been doing. And, you know, only yesterday, a few hundred left. We've got 700 plus Afghans and their families to go today and tomorrow, and another 700, and we will continue that.
It's all very laudable making the efforts to get them out, but what about the rest of the country? Because, you know, you gave hope while the US were there, whilst the forces were there protecting them. There was equality, there was education for women, and now all of that will be reversed because of the decision that's taken. That is a failure, isn't it?
Well, I certainly think it is a failure of the international community, and indeed the failure of the Trump deal. I said the Trump deal was rotten. I spoke out against it. I felt that the Trump deal, which was done, you know, nearly 2 years ago, indicated to the Taliban that they had won. It gave them momentum. And then at the same time, the peace dividend, in other words, taking troops out as a result of it, was taken very quickly. We didn't take out. We retained the function of keeping Kabul secure. But in the end, when the international framework crumbled and the framework nation said it was going, we ended up in a place where we are today. And I think it is of deep regret. And I think we will live with the consequences for many, many years to come. And all I can do as the Defence Secretary, and indeed this government, the Prime Minister has been leading, is do what we can to stand by those people we have an obligation to. And we've brought back over 2,000 and their families since April. We'll be bringing back a further 2,000 at the very least. And we've been working every day to remove any barriers to bringing more people back.
There's likely to be a humanitarian crisis as a consequence. Sorry, Kate, as a consequence of this, though, isn't there? No doubt there will be a huge number of people that will be wanting to flee the country because of what's happened. And also, we now have the terrorism threat because of the situation of the Taliban being in control. So, you know, what happens next? What options are there? Could we go back in to be able to reassure people, to be able to regain the stability of the country, to make sure that that terrorism threat doesn't come into fruition? Well,
first of all, if we were to go back in, we'd have to go back in as an international community, and we'd have to go back in the levels that we went back in the early 2000s, which was over 100,000 people. And that, you know, that therein lies my deep frustration, is that these problem countries or failed states, when they happen, aren't fixed overnight. They have to be managed, and they have to be invested in by a whole international community, whether that's the UN, whether that's NATO. Those are the sort of results. It's not just about the military might. If you remember, in the early parts of Afghanistan, the US and other international and NATO came in, removed al-Qaeda, took away the Taliban. So destroying was very easy. And if you remember, ultimately, Osama bin Laden was killed. But building a nation is very, very hard, and it takes a long period of time, and there is no quick fix on that. So, look, you're absolutely right. A failed state leads to an explosion of poverty, it leads to refugee flows, and it leads to potentially terrorism and security threats. You know, everything I've ever done, both as security minister and this, has been trying to deal with that globally, whether that's in Africa, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. And I think what we're going to see today is a real challenge for our stability in the future globally, and a real question mark for the international community, which is, if you really want to help these countries, you have to do it not just militarily, but also alongside foreign aid, alongside economic development, in a way that has not been happening. We see that even in West Africa. In a sense, putting forces on the ground is one thing, but actually building a nation is another. And that you don't undo 1,000 years of Afghan culture in 20 years. That's been the challenge. That's why we're trying to deal with it. But in the here and now, what can I do? I can stand by those Afghans we have an obligation to. I can do my best to secure the airport, to get that out. And at the same time, in our March Defence Review, invest in new capabilities in order to deal with what we call outside-in problems, which is if we have to protect people of Britain and her interests from outside a country, but nevertheless take action, we will have those abilities to do so.
Listen, let's get real, Ben. This has been a catastrophic failure. I mean, an absolutely catastrophic failure, of which this morning we're only seeing the beginning of. Let's not discuss the last 20 years, because those decisions were made. Let's look at now. There was no exit strategy. You've spoken out against the Trump deal, and you say that your role now is to get people out. It's not working. We've already seen 5 lives lost at the airport. We've spoken to people on the ground who say they can't even get to the airport because of the absolute implosion. Why, a few weeks ago, did this government, your government, think there was going to be no military path for the Taliban? Did you just not have the right intelligence? Were you just blinkered, thinking we've got to get out? I mean, people are going to lose their lives, not to mention, of course, the tens of thousands that already have from the Afghani side and many from the British side as well. We've abandoned them. And sending in 600 troops now is going to do nothing.
Well, look, let me deal with each point. First of all, this has not just happened last week. We've taken out over 2,000 plus Afghans and their families since April. We took out before.
I know, and we've spoken to some of them. I'm talking about the actual exit strategy. Is it that you know that there wasn't one negotiated, other than a bit of an agreement that you could get people out, and even that hasn't worked?
Well, so Kate, first of all, the exit strategy is not something you deliver. It is a long period to take out so much hardware and people and draw down bases. So that has been going on for considerable amounts of time. It's why we don't have British passport holders or military personnel out in the rural areas of Afghanistan. It's why some of those 2,000 plus people that we've relocated have come from further afield in Afghanistan. We have been doing that over the last few weeks and months, way back to April.
Yeah, but we're still in this mess now, so that was a failure too. You know, we've got to take some responsibility. Former British Marines who are staying there, that we've spoken to this morning, because they can't bear to let people go, have said we should be hanging our heads in shame this morning.
Kate, I am absolutely taking responsibility for this, and that is why, you know, I wear, quite rightly, the responsibility of sending men and women in to get people out. There was always going to be a moment when we had to get people out in a situation that was like this. And by the way, this is not the worst case scenario. So we are in a position where we have moved assets to do what we're doing. And as I said earlier, our area, our part of the military part of the runway is open and is functioning, and we are bringing people in.
Not really, because people are getting shot. There are bodies lying on it. I mean, what is the worst case scenario if this isn't it?
Well, there are worst case scenarios, but when you ask the other question, is why did we get this wrong about how quickly the fall of the government would be? Yeah, I think the international community's assessment was wrong. I think the international community took a view that we have spent, for example, £4 billion of British taxpayers' money over the last 20 years developing the capability of the Afghan army, 300,000 people in the Afghan army equipped and supported by us. And I think people didn't think they would melt away that quickly. No. I think that is...
So therefore, that decision of the international community, those who made that decision, you may argue weren't one of them, but they will have blood on their hands, won't they? Not just for those who are losing their lives at this point, but for the cells of terrorism that will now develop in that country.
Well, look, the cells of terrorism, you know, if terrorists use Afghanistan to attack Britain, you know, that will entirely rely on the responsibility of, you know, you can't down the line say, oh, that's Britain's fault. It is fundamentally the terrorist organisation. But what I can say, Kate, is, look, Britain and the international community, I at the time asked and tried to seek partnerships to see if we could stay in Afghanistan. The NATO Secretary General explored that as well. And there was not the appetite from the wider international community to do that. That is the lesson of this. It's always been the lesson that where we have been successful is where we have maintained long-term international partnerships, whether it's UN or whether it is NATO.
Okay.
If we went, technically, could Britain fly in hundreds of thousands of troops? If we did that, we would become an occupying force, and that ends even worse.
The issue now is
nobody wants
to be
that
a waste
either.
of money, a waste of lives, and it now is potentially putting us at risk because of the terrorism threat. Will you be recognising the Taliban as the government?
Well, first of all, Charlotte, it hasn't been a waste of lives, right? I was a security minister for 3 years. I saw AQ plots not come into fruition, not work against Britain, fundamentally because we were in Afghanistan. So at the very least, the dispersal, the weakening, the undermining of AQ for the last 20 years kept Britain's streets safer for the last 20 years. That was not a waste. And making sure you're ahead of them, your terrorist threat, by being in their country, absolutely made us safer. So men and women who sacrificed their lives in Afghanistan did achieve the fundamentals of that. Secondly, educating women. We over 3 million a year Afghan women were going through education. And while I absolutely hear what people say, and they are probably right about Afghan views towards women, they are right, I would say. You can't diseducate or uneducate people once they've got the education. And that is at the very least something that is in that fabric of that society. Is it the same for the next 20 years? No, I don't think it will be. And so your challenge is absolutely right. What next? Well, next, we need to make sure the Taliban's rhetoric matches the reality. Next is that I invest in our armed forces, which the Prime Minister gave me a record settlement compared to nearly anyone else in the international community in March back then to invest in those capabilities, so that we need to protect British citizens from plots in countries that don't want to help. We can still deliver in effect against those plots. It's not optimal, it's not perfect, because being perfect is in partnership with a nation where terrorist plots were, but we do have alternatives and mitigating measures that we can put in place. But am I happy with where we are today, Kate? No, I'm not. Do I like seeing what I do? No, I'm not. Do I think it was a mistake? And do I think the deal of Trump's deal was rotten? Yes, I do. And do I think the international community has a lot to learn from it? Absolutely. So what we can do in here and now is try and help all those people leaving. And our scheme is open-ended. So even after we have gone, we will process people through third countries for many years to come.
OK. Defence Secretary
Well, I
Ben
hope
Wallace,
you're right.
We do hope you're right. We have to leave it there. I know you've got other interviews to get to, but we appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.